Okay, so picture this. We're at the very end of the Bible, in the book of Revelation, and we get this incredible vision of the ultimate city, the New Jerusalem. It's supposed to be the climax of all of human history, a new heaven and a new earth. But right as this amazing vision unfolds, we hit a really strange, baffling mystery. There's a piece missing, and it's so important that it kind of calls everything into question. So let's dive in.
The author, a guy named John, is getting this guided tour of the city. I mean, it's magnificent, golden streets, pearly gates, foundations made of jewels. It's the center of the entire universe. And then he just drops this bombshell. Right where you would absolutely expect to find the most glorious, central building of all, he says, "I did not see a temple in the city."
And that's the big puzzle we're going to solve today. For anyone reading this for centuries, this was a shocking, almost unbelievable thing to say. I mean, why would the final perfect city of God be missing its most sacred, most essential building? The temple was supposed to be the center of everything, the one place where heaven and earth actually met. And now, poof, it's just gone.
To really get just how radical and startling this is, you kind of have to put yourself in their shoes. We need to understand what literally everyone at the time, Jewish, Christian, even the Romans, would have expected to see. John wasn't just writing this in a vacuum, you know? He was building on this mountain of prophecy and cultural assumptions, and all of them pointed in one and only one direction.
And this is where it gets really wild. You see the direct contradiction. John's main inspiration for this whole vision is the prophet Ezekiel. And Ezekiel's prophecy spends 9 whole chapters, meticulously describing a huge, glorious new temple. John borrows everything from Ezekiel, the language, the measurements, the angel tour guide, everything except the main event. It's like describing a new car in perfect detail, but leaving out the engine.
And this wasn't just some old prophecy thing. Other Jewish writings from that period, they all imagined a restored Jerusalem with a brand new temple. Even the culture all around them, the Greco-Romans, they built their perfect cities around a central temple to their gods or the emperor. A city without a temple was just unthinkable. So what on earth is John trying to tell us?
Well, the good news is, John doesn't just drop this giant riddle on us and then walk away. He immediately gives us the first part of the answer. And it's a twist so profound, it completely reframes the whole purpose of what a temple was for in the first place. And boom, there it is. The reason there's no temple building is because the reality that the building was pointing to has finally fully arrived. You see, the building was always just a symbol, right? It was a placeholder for the actual presence of God. Now that God and Christ are right there, living with humanity directly, with nothing in between, well, you just don't need the symbol anymore.
So the whole thing really boils down to one word: access. The old temple system, with all its veils and restricted areas, that was necessary because sin separated people from a holy God. But in the new creation, that separation is completely gone. There are no more barriers. God's presence isn't stuck inside a stone building anymore.
But hold on, because that's not even the end of the story. In fact, this is where it gets truly mind-bending. John isn't just saying the temple is obsolete, that we've moved past it. No, he's making a much bigger, much more audacious claim. He's saying the temple isn't gone at all. It's just been resized.
Let that just sink in for a second. The temple didn't vanish. It expanded. It exploded to fill the entire city. God's sacred space, the place where he dwells, is no longer a building in the city. It is the city.
Theologians have a kind of fancy term for this. They call it coextensive presence. It's just the idea that God's presence isn't restricted to one spot anymore, but it fills up the entire new creation. But how do we know for sure that this is what John means? Well, he leaves us a trail of clues, a set of architectural breadcrumbs hidden in plain sight. So let's put on our detective hats and pull out the blueprints. John describes this New Jerusalem using very, very specific language and imagery. And guess what? Almost all of it is pulled directly from the Old Testament descriptions of the tabernacle and the temple. He's essentially laying the temple blueprint over the entire city. We're going to see how 4 key clues unlock this whole mystery. We'll look at the city's shape, its materials, its foundations, and, yep, even the role of the people who live there. First up, the shape. This one is just brilliant. Okay, so the most sacred space in the entire temple was the Holy of Holies, right? The little room where God's presence literally dwelt. Well, according to the book of 1 Kings, it was a perfect cube. Now check this out. What shape is the New Jerusalem? John tells us its length, width, and height are all equal. It's a massive, city-sized perfect cube.
The whole city has become the Holy of Holies.
All right, clue number 2. What's the city made of? And again, you have to realize none of these details are random. Every material he lists is deliberately chosen because it echoes how the original temple was built.
So he says the entire city is made of pure gold, so pure it's like clear glass. Sound familiar? It should. The entire interior of Solomon's temple was overlaid with pure gold. And then you get to the foundations of the city. John lists 12 different precious stones. And yep, you guessed it, they happen to be the exact same stones from the breastplate that the high priest wore when he went into God's presence for the people.
The implication here is just staggering. What used to be the job of one single person, the high priest, is now the status of every single citizen. The people themselves are the foundation of this city temple, and they all have direct access to God. They're all serving as a kingdom of priests. That barrier between the special priest and everybody else, just like the temple walls, it has completely dissolved.
So when you kind of zoom out and look at the big picture, you realize this isn't just about a building. It's the final chapter in a story that started way back in the first pages of the Bible, in a garden. You see, the Bible's whole grand story is about God's desire to dwell with humanity. It started in Eden, which was basically the original garden sanctuary. After sin messed things up, his presence was limited, kind of restricted to the tabernacle and the temple. Then, his presence came and walked among us in the person of Christ. And finally, in the New Jerusalem, it just becomes this all-encompassing universal reality.
So the missing temple isn't a mistake or an oversight. It's the whole point. The story ends right where it began, with God living with his people, not in a building, but in a totally perfected creation. The New Jerusalem is the ultimate temple garden.
So why does this matter so much? Why is this such a big deal? Because it shows us that going back to a physical temple would actually be a huge step backward. It would be like choosing the shadow instead of the real thing.
I love this analogy from a scholar named Dr. Greg Beale. He says, look, if you were separated from someone you love, you'd probably treasure their photograph, right? But once you're finally reunited and they walk in the room, why would you keep staring at the picture? The reality is here. The temple was the picture. God's direct presence is the reality.
And that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. The entire biblical story, from start to finish, seems to be pushing us away from locking God's presence into a sacred building and toward finding it with and in his people. So if the ultimate goal was always about presence and not a specific place, what does that change about how we look for it and how we experience it right here, right now?